Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so I think about time we start. My name is Amy Davis. Welcome to the latest Read webinar, Empowering Workplaces Navigating ADHD with the one and only Alex Partridge. I am Amy Davis, Head of Content Marketing at Read. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to delve into the topic of ADHD in the workplace and how to create a supportive and inclusive environment for neurodivergent individuals. This webinar is ahead of ADHD Awareness Month, which takes place next week, so it's a great time to kind of raise awareness of the topic. Before we get started and before I introduce you to Alex, we have a few housekeeping bits to run through. This webinar is being recorded, so if you do find it really useful, want to watch it again, you will be able to, or forward it on to your colleagues to also watch. That would be great. We will send a recording in a email after the event has taken place. The chat with Alex will last for about 30 to 40 minutes, and at the end you'll have plenty of time to put your questions to him. Throughout the webinar, please, if you think of any questions for Alex, do put them in the Q&A and we will come to those at the end. And you should find the Q&A function if you don't know where it is. It's on the top right hand side of your screen. So without further ado, I'm delighted to be joined by the founder of UNILAD and LADbible, Alex Partridge. Good afternoon, Alex. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Amy, and hello everyone, and thanks so much for the invitation.
You are more than welcome. We've got the most registrants we've ever had for this webinar, so people are very excited to hear what you've got to say on the topic. So we are really excited for you to be here. First things first, before we kind of go into the questions, are you able to give us a bit of a brief overview of your career so far, and also tell us a little bit about your relationship with ADHD?
Yeah, no, it's a great question to start. So I got diagnosed with ADHD about a year and a half ago at age 34. Previous to that, I had sold two social media brands, one called LADbible, one called UNILAD. How I started those really was a culmination of many failed business attempts, which I can now look back at through the lens of ADHD and see why those failed. But with each one, there was definitely a learning to be made. One I can think of is I impulsively, when I was at university in my first year, I bought this 6-foot giant freezer to students in the middle of the night after all of the shops had shut. And I was so excited. I remember buying the domain, buying the 6-foot freezer, filling it up with pizzas from Tesco, and I made a Facebook page called Quick Pizza, and people would submit their orders in, and I had 3 or 4 people cycling around Oxford at silly o'clock in the morning delivering pizzas. But I remember also about a week later, my interest for the idea suddenly just evaporated and disappeared, and I abandoned it. And really that was one of 10 or 15 businesses that I started and subsequently abandoned prior to landing on the ones that did sustain my interest, which was the social media businesses, and now the podcast ADHD Chatter, which I started about a year and a half ago from this bedroom in my flat in Brighton. But after 6 months, I realized again my interest was going to be sustained in it, so I scaled it up, moved into a studio in Battersea in London, and now it gets 300,000 downloads a month, 2 million followers on social media. And I think it's a testament really to the demand for raw and honest conversations around ADHD, particularly with women and girls, and to recognize that it's so much more than the stereotype and what a lot of people think. I think if you had a doctor on here or you Googled what is ADHD, it would say it is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by traits of impulsivity and disorganization and forgetfulness. And it can be that, but it's so much more. I think it's a lifetime of feeling different. It's a lifetime of being told that you're too much, too sensitive, not understanding why you react so badly to criticism and rejection, not understanding why you have to shapeshift and adjust who you are in order to be more palatable for whoever you're standing in front of at any given time. And then you get an awareness of ADHD or a diagnosis often later in life, and you can sort of look back through the lens of awareness, peel back the layers of the mask, and you can almost feel very emotional for the younger version of yourself, the version that was so anxious and didn't know why, struggled to maintain friendships and didn't know why. If I go back in time, my first memory of feeling different was when I was 6 years old. Someone in the classroom said, "You could be one of the cool kids, Alex, if you weren't so weird." And the following year, I remember again sat in the classroom with a racing mind, happily daydreaming at the back, and the teacher pointed at me and said, "Alex, do you know the answer to this question?" And all of the class turned around and looked at me. And in that moment, I remember my heart rate accelerated and I stood up and left the classroom, and I found someone in the corridor and I said, "Please call an ambulance, I'm having a heart attack." And of course, by the time the paramedic turned up, I had calmed down and I was told that it wasn't a heart attack. I was having an anxiety attack at 7 years old. So that's what ADHD is for me. It's this incredible ability to create and to be productive and to be entrepreneurial and to be a massive asset to a team when there's conditions that suit your brain. But on the flip side, when you're forced into an office that's not suited to your brain, or a classroom that's overstimulating or too bright, then there's tremendous anxiety and overstimulation and almost a shutdown. So that's why I'm so passionate now about raising awareness around ADHD in general, particularly amongst employees in the workplace, to show that how actual simple accommodations can take a very unproductive, anxious, unhappy employee to a very productive employee that's a massive asset to a business.
Thanks, Alex. There's some really good stuff there. And obviously, your experience of ADHD is completely different to somebody else. I mean, on your podcast, you interview other people and talk about their experiences, I presume. Just quickly, I'm putting a bit of a off-the-cuff one in there. How do other people's experiences differ to yours that you've come across?
So there's huge intersectionality across male and female, race, social economic backgrounds. But I think what is so clear is that there's some common themes. I think anxiety seems to manifest in neurodiversity extremely often. I think this reaction to criticism, rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria seems to be apparent across the board. It's this visceral physiological response to criticism or perceived criticism, whether in relationships or in the workplace. And I think that's really a key pillar of the awareness I'm trying to do now is A, raising awareness of what it is, and B, how you can then therefore effectively communicate with someone who might be struggling with this, and recognizing that it's often a response to something that's happened previously in their life. There's a statistic that shows people with ADHD and neurodivergent conditions generally have been exposed to 20,000 more micro criticisms and micro corrections and rejections throughout their entire life, because they do feel different and their behavior might not fit into the sort of standard definition of what society classifies as normal. And I had a brilliant doctor on the podcast, Dr. Samantha Hugh, who's got a PhD in neuroscience, and she was scanning the brains of people who have ADHD, and there's similarities between someone who has complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and to recognize that if you take all of these micro corrections and micro rejections in your early years, that compounds over time to create an adult in the workplace that is incredibly responsive and defensive to criticisms and to feedback that isn't overtly positive. So that's the main theme, really, is RSD is something that seems to be the common factor amongst everyone I interview, and anxiety and other things like burnout and imposter syndrome. But they're all big topics.
Yeah, definitely. So how has ADHD personally impacted your work life, and how have you learned, and how are you still learning to manage it effectively?
Yeah, I mean, it's massively impacted everything about my life. Anxiety has always been the common denominator that's almost been very disabling in a lot of environments. After I went to university, I got a job in a marketing agency in Manchester, and I remember sat in the office, and it was a busy office, lots of people having conversations, a table tennis table, loud music, lots of people chatting. And my job was to come in and grow their social media, their Facebook pages. And I remember sat in this overstimulating office, and my brain in that environment was completely paralyzed. I was unable to do the job that I was capable of doing. And I knew that I was capable of doing it because I had done it previously when I was at home in my bedroom on my own. I'd done it very well. But when I was in this busy office, I was unable to do the job. And I left that job after 6 weeks, having grown their Facebook from 0 to 5,000. And then subsequently, I got a job in another agency, and I reflected on the previous experience. And I said, please, can you allow me to work from home sometimes? Please, can you allow me to work downstairs in the canteen where it's quiet when I am in the office? And most importantly, can you trust me and judge me on my outcomes and not my processes? And my new boss said yes. And within the same 3 to 6 week period, I had grown them from 0 to 8 million followers on social media. And it's a very exaggerated example, but a truthful example of how simple accommodations in the workplace can really make a difference to one's productivity.
Brilliant. Now, there is often, we know there is a stigma associated with ADHD, and I think people are still learning very much about it. What would you say some of the common misconceptions from employers are about employees with ADHD?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think a common one is that ADHD means that you're going to be physically hyperactive, and you're going to be, I think, the stereotype of what a lot of people still think ADHD is, which is you're going to be fidgety and restlessness and needing to move all the time and be a nuisance in the office. But we now know that that's not the case. And we know that for a lot of people, particularly women, it can be very internalized, and that hyperactivity can be inside people's heads, which again is a blessing and a curse. That internal hyperactivity, that racing mind, the constant internal chatter, being able to connect the dots, can lead to amazing things like creativity and pattern recognition. But when it's not accommodated for, and that racing mind is left to sort of do its own thing, it can cause, again, tremendous anxiety. So I think, recognizing that it's not always physical hyperactivity, that's a common misconception. People seem to think people with ADHD can't focus, which is ridiculous. It's one of the biggest pet peeves, I think, is that people, they hear ADHD and they think, oh, they're not going to be able to focus. From my experience, people with ADHD don't have a deficit of attention or a deficit of focus. They have an abundance of it.
Too much, yeah.
They have too much of it, and they start focusing in on perhaps the wrong things at the wrong times, like I was doing in that office with the music and the ping pong table and other distractions. We have so much attention when we're accommodated for, and we find something that we're genuinely interested for. That focus lasers in and is stronger than, I think, the average person. I think another misconception is people with ADHD can't or won't do well in leadership positions because it's too overwhelming or it's too much responsibility for them. Again, it's nonsense. People with ADHD thrive in positions like that. It's the novelty, it's the fast pace of it, it's the not being static and maintaining that sense of novelty. High pressure situations, being calm in a crisis, all traits of ADHD for a lot of people that make for great leadership positions. Another misconception is people with ADHD don't try hard enough. That's a big one that is a big pet peeve. I think people with ADHD try so hard, and when they don't have that awareness and that understanding that they're working against the tide and they're in an environment that isn't accommodating them, then that overworking can lead to burnout, again, anxiety, low mood. People with ADHD work and try tremendously hard. So that's another misconception. And finally, it's that men can only have ADHD, which I think is massively being debunked now, which is great. You know, the scientific community has caught up. I don't think it's quite caught up in all offices around the country. I think I still see shock on managers and business owners' face when they hear that it can be in people outside of the stereotype that they think everyone can be affected by ADHD. So I think they're the 5 misconceptions: that it only meaning you're physically hyperactive, people with ADHD can't focus, not good in leadership positions, only men and boys can have ADHD, and people with ADHD don't try hard enough. All of those things are absolutely nonsense.
Yeah, I agree. I have a team member in my team who has ADHD and can really resonate with some of the things that you're saying there. Just tell me though, Alex, for our information, just obviously most people say that like look for a diagnosis at childhood, but you say you only found out 18 months ago or whatever. Is ADHD always present, or does it come on later in life? How can you tell me a little bit about that? Do you know much about kind of like the diagnosis of it?
Yeah, I mean, so ADHD is a condition that you're born with. It's a
Born with.
lifetime neurodevelopmental difference. We don't like the word disorder. I like to use the word difference. Most people, particularly women and girls, are getting diagnosed now and having that awareness because it was only 15, 20 years ago that society and the medical community knew or realized that women could have ADHD. But people are really good at hiding their ADHD. And that goes for men and women. Everyone, you mask up. We all become experts at hiding our flaws, our traits that we think are flaws in the eyes of society. I don't think any of them are flaws, but we all become experts at fitting in, shape-shifting, adjusting who we are to be more palatable for whatever situation we're in. We do everything to please other people and to appear normal at the great cost of our own well-being and our own self-esteem and our own ability to have any self-confidence. It makes us, without the awareness piece, big people pleasers. We say yes a lot. We overcommit. We take on too much work. All of these things lead to burnout, have not great outcomes. I think that's why a lot of people don't get diagnosed and have that awareness until later on, because the science and the awareness just wasn't there, and B, they had an intrinsic feeling that they were different, probably in their early years, and because of that, they really coped. They really managed to change who they are, to hide that. So many people masked for so long, and then they get to their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I've spoken to so many people on the podcast who have this realization in their 50s or 60s, and it's that, oh my gosh moment. Like, who am I? I've spent my entire life pretending to be someone that I'm actually not, just to fit in. And then you go through the process of unmasking and self-awareness to try and understand what is a coping mechanism and what is really you. And that's a process that you have to do slowly. But yeah, to answer your question, the consensus is that it's a condition that you're born with.
Okay.
And because of the traits aren't aligned with what society necessarily deems as normal, you adjust and you change to try and make yourself as normal as possible. But the consequences of that can be quite dire.
Yeah, I would have thought so, definitely. Okay, so there are plenty of things that people who have ADHD can do to help increase their output. We were talking about some a little while ago, so I'm hoping you're going to share some really good ones now. Can you give me some specific strategies or tactics that have worked for you and significantly improved your productivity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since my diagnosis and really before that, I mean, movement has always been a key part of my routine. The trajectory of my day is always considerably different if I don't start the day intentionally with movement, and that can look different for everyone. I like to go on a run, not a long run. If it's rubbish weather outside, I throw up a YouTube video and I try and do a couple of minutes movement intentionally. And I think particularly for the ADHD mind, having some kind of exercise routine, whether it's daily or a couple of times a week, is really beneficial. prioritizing sleep for me has been incredibly important. When I don't get a good night's sleep, or my sleep's interrupted, if my phone's not on sleep mode and something happens that interrupts my sleep, my ADHD traits, the negative side, massively increase and the positives massively decrease. So I really think prioritizing, and that's, you could do a whole episode on sleep, but really focusing and deep diving into what good sleep means for you and how you can prioritize sleep. The biggest one I've done in the last couple of years, which has probably been the biggest change and the biggest noticeable difference for me, is really limiting alcohol, and going through long stretches of complete no alcohol. If I have one beer in the evening or a glass of wine or whatever it might be for whoever, the consequences of that really drag on for days and days and days. Whereas if I have no alcohol, I prioritize my exercise, and I'm really intentional about trying to remove distractions from the bedroom. I try and not take my phone in with me. It's easier said than done. You know, when I wake up, I don't want my phone to be the first thing I look at. You wouldn't let 1,000 people into your room, so don't let them into your mind first thing in the morning. So there's three things which have really, really benefited my productivity. With the diagnosis, I think it's starting self-awareness exercises as soon as possible is really beneficial. Really being intentional about reflecting on the days and being honest about what you enjoyed doing and what you didn't enjoy doing, what made you happy and what made you sad. It sounds really basic, but if you can build up this arsenal of self-awareness, then you can really become acutely aware of what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. In business, that served me massively, because before that, and this is why the previous businesses has failed, I didn't have a self-awareness of what my strengths and what my weaknesses were. So I was trying desperately hard to do everything that I wasn't necessarily amazing at and burning myself out. And eventually, because of that burnout, I was abandoning stuff and quitting things and just not doing them and just falling back into procrastination because I didn't have this awareness of what my strengths and what I actually enjoyed doing were. So I think starting that self-awareness journey as soon as possible, and then delegating your weaknesses if you can. And in the workplace, that can look like being really honest with your manager and saying, can we body double? Can I pass off parts of that project that I know I'm not amazing at? And can I share it with someone who is going to be a benefit to the segment of that project? I think that's a big thing. You know, body doubling as a topic is huge and has helped me in business and in personal life. But I think for employees of any business, or if you are a business owner yourself, really buddying up with someone and working alongside someone if you can, and also being really honest about where your strengths and weaknesses lie. And once you've isolated your weaknesses, trying to partner up with someone who your weaknesses are their strength. I think that's such a massive tool. And really, that's a really simple and cheap, if not free, accommodation that companies can make for their employees. I think, again, I'm so intentional about trying to not hold myself, because that doesn't normally work well, creating accountability outside of myself. I think that's so important for people who have, for anyone really, but particularly for people with ADHD, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an employee, or in your personal life, creating that outside accountability. That could be an accountability buddy, it could be an ADHD coach, it could be your partner, it could be another colleague. Creating that third party person who you can share your goals with, share your deadlines with, and you can have weekly or monthly check-ins with that person to see how you've done. And it feeds into that sort of that people-pleasing element. For me, certainly it does. That sort of fear of confrontation. It's some phenomenon that really enables me and motivates me to do the task if I know that I can show it off to someone at the end of the week or end of the day or the end of the month. So I think that whole accountability, body doubling piece is incredibly powerful for the ADHD mind.
Brilliant. You've covered a little bit of this question with that kind of the body doubling and accountability, but what about kind of task management and prioritization of tasks? Any tips on how someone with ADHD could do that, or how a manager can support them with that?
Yeah, so I think task management is such a big topic for
Yeah.
the ADHD community, because we can easily say yes to something big, because we all get very excited when something new comes into our life, and then it can fade and we don't commit, or we underdeliver, or we just don't do it, and then we're filled with shame and we have to confront the situation one way or another. I think being really intentional, and this goes back to the self-awareness piece, once you know that you work better this way, is being really intentional in breaking big projects up into smaller projects, and assigning mini deadlines for every aspect of the smaller parts of the big task. It's suddenly less daunting, less overwhelming. It's more opportunity for you to share each mini deadline with your accountability buddy, and it's just more achievable. And you can also, once you've broken the big task up into the smaller sections, you can then, with the self-awareness piece, say, okay, I'm really good at 8 out of 10 of those pieces of the task. Those other 2 I'm going to struggle with. Who can I buddy up with and to help me with those 2 tasks to get the whole project over the line? So yeah, I think really being intentional about breaking big projects up and into smaller segments, and then creating mini deadlines for each one, is really important.
Brilliant. Okay, so how can employers, in your eyes, create a more inclusive environment for neurodiverse employees to allow them to succeed? That could be anything from kind of like initial job application, I suppose, to in the workplace itself.
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a great question. Employers, I think the most important thing and foremost is employers can do is to show that you understand, and to put the message out that you have an awareness of neurodiversity, and words like autism and ADHD and dyspraxia and dyslexia and Tourette's and OCD, all of these things just become commonplace in the office, because there are lots of accommodations, and I'll go into many in a second. But I think ultimately enabling any employee to feel like they're in a safe place, without feeling like if they ask for help, they're going to be discriminated against, bullied against, or whatever, or denied a promotion, whatever that is. I think putting signals out, putting a policy notice on your website, on your board, bringing in neurodivergent speakers, making it clear what you post on your LinkedIn, on your social medias, put out as many signals as you can to let your employees know that they're in a safe space. I think fundamentally that's so important. You could probably get away with doing nothing else, and you would notice a huge increase in productivity and staff retention and general happiness and well-being if you just did that, which is so important. At the job interview stage, I think when you're putting out job adverts, being inclusive of language and recognizing that many neurodivergent folk, especially within the autistic community, and I relate to this a lot, is we're very literal thinkers. So when we see a job advert and it says, okay, what do you need? What skills are required? And it says, you have to be a great communicator. That's a very standard thing you see on a job advert. But someone like myself, I would look at that and be very put off from applying, because I don't know what that means. Because I'm personally, I think, pretty good at sending emails and communicating in an email, but put me in a meeting full of 10 people and ask me to communicate and contribute to an idea, and I crumble and fall apart. So for me, it's about the precision of language in job adverts. When the interview comes, and supply the questions ahead of time if you can. Don't give weight to outdated and traditional forms of professionalism. If the person doesn't have a super strong handshake or maintain perfect eye contact for me is very hard. You probably noticed in this meeting, in this webinar,
you look around,
and as with socials and in meetings all the time, and if I'm looking you in the eye, that creates a lot of effort and I'm not paying attention to what you're saying, and I'll leave that job interview or that meeting with absolutely no memory of what was said, because for me, eye contact is masking. So it's just so important to have that awareness piece in interviews, that if someone doesn't have amazing eye contact, isn't dressed in a suit, isn't grabbing you by the hand and shaking it, that's not necessarily a sign. Of course, that's not a sign. Again, these are all outdated versions of professionalism. I think when you're in the office, meetings, provide agendas ahead of meetings. It takes away so much anxiety if people know what they're walking into. Provide agendas at the end of the meeting, and you can get very cheap available software to transcribe meetings into written text, which can be sent to all attendees. Because if I'm in a meeting, I'm anxious for a number of reasons, and I will not remember most of what's said. But if I can leave the meeting and I know that the transcript of the meeting, and in a condensed format, you can put ChatGPT to help you here, and it gets emailed around to all attendees, massively helpful. Don't let the loudest voice in meetings dictate the decision. So many times in my experience, I go into a meeting, the boss, the manager, puts a problem to the group, and there's 10 people in the meeting, and 5 of them are tapping their feet, biting their fingernails, most probably very anxious. And then there's the extroverts who are shouting out ideas, and don't be really quick to take those ideas as the best ones. Allow a grace period, if you can, of a day, if possible, maybe a few hours if it's urgent. If you can't do this, I totally get it. It's not always possible. Allow a grace period for people to go away with the information and to think in a safe place of a solution to the problem, and they can submit that idea through email or a box on the side of the wall, whatever it might be. And I guarantee more often than not, the best ideas will come through that channel, because from my experience, the best creative solutions to problems are stuck inside anxious minds in those meetings. And if you allow that grace period, then you can really unlock that potential. Little things like normalizing the use of fidget toys and noise cancelling headphones. I have this thumbstone on my hand. I've had that the whole time. I use it on all my podcasts. Whenever I talk on stage, it's always there. It channels some of the physical hyperactivity that I do have sometimes into a place that isn't my mind. Because if it gets stuck in my mind, then it can turn into anxiety and get in the way of me being able to think. Normalizing noise cancelling headphones and fidget toys, encouraging walking meetings if you can, even if it's walking around the office, or if you're lucky enough to walk around a park or whatever it is. I think movement, going back to the piece I said at the beginning, is so important for ADHD minds, and all minds really. Having flexible start times. Imagine if you're someone who's overstimulated easily and you're forced to come into work at the time that's going to make you impact the rush hour commute, and you have to deal with all of that overstimulation with the tube and the traffic and the busyness before you even get to the office. Allowing a flexible start time for everyone, if possible, can be massively beneficial to productivity. I mentioned earlier, breaking projects up into smaller tasks can be massively helpful in creating less overwhelm and project initiation. When giving instructions, I think allowing the instructions to be given in a written format and not verbally said. I'm allergic to verbal instructions, and I've said this so many times. If someone is explaining something to me, whether it's, I don't stop and ask people for traffic directions anymore, because I've made that mistake so many times. If someone's explaining board game instructions to me, it's the same. If someone's explaining something verbally to me, it most likely will not go in. So give people written instructions instead, if you can, through email, whatever that is. I think really recognizing that high productivity doesn't look the same for everyone. Some people can come in and they can do a 9 till 5 day very happily. Some people might do 40 hours of work in 4 hours, or some people might do 4 hours of work at a random time in the afternoon. I think, again, it goes back to that piece of judging people on the outcomes and what they actually deliver rather than the process. I think that's so important, because what is high productivity and efficient working doesn't look the same for everyone. Yeah, I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, loads. Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Really, really great. Okay, I'm conscious that we've got like 25 minutes and I've seen loads and loads of questions coming through, but I'm just going to ask you one more that we've got pre-planned. So if you're an employer and you feel that you've got an employee with ADHD, or what kind of warning signs are there? What might you recognise as an employer of one of your employees that's struggling with ADHD? How can managers and senior leaders respond and be supportive of that?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question and a great question. I think with a lot of neurodivergent conditions, the common manifestation is anxiety. And a struggling employee with ADHD or another neurodivergent condition, or an employee in general, signs of anxiety will be the first red flag, the first indicator from my experience. And I guess, okay, what does an anxious employee look like? I think an anxious employee is someone who has made a change to their routine, perhaps is withdrawing from situations that's out of their sphere of normality in terms of what their character's like and what you know them to be like. If there's a sudden change in how they present themselves, I think that can be a sign of anxiety. I think people who are anxious often say yes to everything, and overcommit, and the people-pleasing element goes up. So I think it's good to almost have like a subconscious profile of everyone in the business, and to recognize when someone's behavior changes. And of course, there could be a million reasons why someone's behavior changes, but it could be because they're really struggling. Has their physical appearance changed? Were they quite well? Has their pride in their appearance changed? Were they always consistently on time or consistently within a range of arrival time, and now that's changed? I think suddenly withdrawing from meetings is a sign. I think if you do recognize any of these things, it's so important to begin an honest conversation with that person. I think the first line of contact is probably an email, anonymously, obviously, and to say, is there anything I can help you with? I really want to understand. I might be wrong, but I've noticed that you. Is there anything I can help you with? Are you struggling? And to really identify what the problem is, and build a plan with that employee on steps moving forward to increase, to try and get out of the rut. And then once you have this plan, is then to ensure regular check-ins and to ensure that it isn't just a one-time thing and forgotten about. It's ensuring that at least initially afterwards, after the initial chat, it's probably like a weekly or even a every other day check-in, depending on the severity of the outcome of the first conversation. It could just be something minor. It could be major. It could be a bereavement in the family. It could be a health issue. It could be a number of things. I think if the employee is happy and willing to open up to you and to share that, then a plan needs to be put in place, an appropriate plan, which involves really focusing on that employee and putting in relevant adjustments and changes, and being more accommodating during the time that it might be critical to intervene, and to ensure that the regular check-ins happen, so you can show that the connection's strong and your willingness to understand and help is fixed and static, and also to monitor and to adjust the action as the awareness and the outcomes of the check-ins adjust.
Brilliant. There's lots there again. Oh, Alex, you're a font of knowledge. Okay, so on to the questions. I think we've had over 20 come in, so we're going to go through them as many as we can. First one is from Mark Clark. Mark asks, Alex, as a psychotherapist with ADHD, alongside my GP and psychiatrist co-founders who also have ADHD, we've launched launched a men's mental health initiative called Man Confidence, part of which is focusing on supporting men with ADHD and autism. Given your experience building successful platforms while managing ADHD, how do you see businesses like UNILAD and LADbible and ADHD podcasts contributing to reducing the stigma around ADHD in men, particularly in workplace settings? If it's easier for you, is it easier for you do you want to read the questions?
Yeah, I can do. Given your experience building successful platforms while managing ADHD, how do you see businesses like UNILAD contributing to reducing the stigma? Yeah, I mean, it's so important for stigma to be reduced across all demographics. I think I try and bring on a balanced demographic of guests to represent as broad a spectrum as possible. A lot of communities, particularly within the ADHD space, have felt massively misrepresented. I think it's great that big brands like LADbible, UNILAD, many others, I'm trying to do it now with my podcast, are talking about this topic, because the awareness piece has increased due to social media activity, it just being a much more spoken about and understood term. But actually, to bring on guests who have from all different sorts of backgrounds, to show that the diversity within the niche as well. Because again, I think you think of ADHD, a lot of people unfortunately still just think, okay, naughty little boys, that means liability, that means they're going to be a problem in the workplace, in schools, whatever it is, in relationships. But actually, if you Google ADHD, it says struggle with focus, struggle with disorganization. But when it's understood, we can see the positive things of creativity and pattern recognition and being calm in a crisis and being able to see unique problems to difficult solutions. And all of these things are tremendous assets in the workplace and in relationships and in business. And I think all of these companies need to bring on and interview and give a platform to as many different people as possible to share as many success stories as possible, but also being honest with the struggles, to really balance the narrative around ADHD and show that, yes, there are struggles, there are lots of things, but when harnessed and understood and accommodated for, there are also tremendous strengths.
Brilliant. Okay, next one. Nick Porteous. I have had my diagnosis for 5 years now. Sorry, I'm a little bit breathless because I've got a really bad chest and I'm still coming to terms with it. Has the memory side of ADHD caused you to make mistakes at work, and how can people work around this? What advice can you give to someone on this?
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely has. And before I understood ADHD, I was probably putting in subconscious self-accommodations to help with my memory. It's got me into a lot of tricky situations, forgetting deadlines, forgetting anniversaries in relationships, forgetting deadlines for tax returns, all sorts of things that have knock-on effects with both personally or financially. The ADHD tax is huge. Forgetting your reusable shopping bags is a minor one, but that's 25p every time you go to the supermarket. So for me, it's about visual reminders. It's got to be about visual reminders, because if I rely on my brain to remember something that I'm not interested in, it will just cease to exist. It will just float off into the void and just cease to exist. So I have big whiteboards everywhere. I would turn my computer around, but I have a huge whiteboard just to the left of my screen now. I have whiteboards in every room of my flat. I have a pad of paper and a pen hanging on most walls in my flat. And so when I have an idea or I think of something, I write it down, and I write it down now, because if I don't write it down now, which is where I spend 100% of my time, the future and the past, they don't exist a lot of the time in my mind. I write it down now. So when my now walks past the whiteboard or the pad of paper again, that thought then comes back into my now, and it's not a foolproof system, but a lot of the time it is what it takes to prompt me to actually action the thing. So that's my advice, and everyone's different, but I think really being unashamed about putting systems in place, like my whiteboards with colourful pens and notepads hanging on all of my walls, which might appear, I suppose, childish. If you asked me a couple of years ago, I would say, no, that's I don't need to do that. I'm 36 years old. That's going to make me feel shame. But actually now, with my self-awareness and the honesty I have with myself, it's like, well, I have to do that. Otherwise, I will fail to cancel that domain. I won't remember to send that email. I'll forget to pay that parking ticket. Like, it will cost me a fortune and my life will fall apart, if I'm honest, if I don't put these things in place. So if it works for you, then there's absolutely no shame in the managing and the tools we put in place to assist with our memory. But yeah, the dark side, memory side, yeah, before, huge mistakes. And you know, look back, that's most likely why a lot of my early businesses has failed. I forgot to turn up to meetings. I forgot to submit the brief or the proof of concept to the advertiser who wanted to advertise on my early websites before the social media companies. So much stuff I just forgot to do, and people just stopped working with me. I just felt awful, full of shame, full of self-hatred. Like, my confidence hit a rock bottom because I just didn't understand why I wasn't able to do what everyone else seemed to be able to do with ease, and yet I couldn't remember to send an email or reply to a text, and the consequences of those were tangible, they were real. But now I put the systems in place, the memory jogs, keeping everything visual. I think fundamentally, if it wasn't for that, those whiteboards and my sort of my belief now that when I have a thought, I write it down immediately. If it wasn't for that, I think things would be very different. And I think that's my number one advice for anyone who struggles with memory.
Brilliant, thank you. So it sounds like carrier bags are only a small part of your problem. Everything else is much bigger.
Yeah, and remembering to return my returns.
Okay, another one from Samantha B. She's wondering if you have any tips for job hunting and attending interviews while dealing again with the memory issues, the anxiety and RSD that inevitably come with ADHD.
Yeah, I think, you know, we can ask for questions in advance ahead of job interviews. I think that's really important, because otherwise it creates the feeling of unknown and the fear that can come with that. Walking into a job interview not knowing, feeling underprepared, not knowing what you're going to be asked. Ask for questions in advance. I think that's really been a game changer for me, and helped so many other people that I've spoken to. And it's okay to ask if you can have job interviews virtually. It should be, with the webcam turned off. It depends how severe the anxiety is. You know, I've conducted interviews virtually with the webcam turned off so many times. I think that's an accommodation and an advocacy for yourself that everyone will find massively helpful. And with RSD, I mean, RSD is I think the biggest Achilles heel of ADHD, and there is no solution to it. There is no remedy or magic pill that will make it disappear. I think it's an awareness piece, and recognizing that when you are triggered and someone does say something that snaps you back to that time that has made you feel rage or intense sadness, and you can become completely dysregulated. I think it's so important to put a breaker between the trigger and the response, and if you can intentionally, and there's no shame in doing this, remove yourself from the situation. Even if it's in a job interview, ask, can I have 5 minutes, and just remove yourself from the job interview. Remove yourself, go for a walk, give yourself time to decompress. And then once you have entered a state of regulation again, then you can reapproach the situation from a more proportionate mind. So I think, yeah, the RSD piece is huge. And I think I've spoken to lots of experts on my podcast about this particular topic, and to recognize that it's not your fault, and that it's a response to the fact that we are different, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's not our fault. But because we're different, we've been exposed to so many little micro criticisms in our early years. Have that awareness piece really helps. And then if you can, try and remove yourself from the situation, whether that's in a job interview or a relationship or whatever it is, and give yourself time to observe, to reflect, and then reapproach the situation from a more regulated place.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, the next one's anonymous. This person's been diagnosed with ADHD for 2 years now. They were medicated, but due to the lack of medications, the working environment in an office can be overwhelming at times. What would you suggest to employers in creating an environment which eases brain noise of ADHD, not just offering noise cancelling headphones, just to help with days in the office?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think probably the first thing is to show that you are aware and you are willing to offer support is really helpful into enabling that person to feel safer. There's certain techniques, Pomodoro technique, where you have a break, you take regular breaks, because there will be lots of occasions where you won't be able to lower the noise. You will just be in an office. If we're honest with ourselves, lots of offices are just by design quite noisy. So being intentional about asking to have blocks of work time. So say you do 15 minutes and then you have a 2 to 5 minute walk, or you do half an hour and then you have a 15-minute break. So I think asking for that setup rather than being forced to work continuously for hours and hours and hours in the same setting. And if you are in a business, or if you have the resources to create a safe space, and not a safe space, a quiet space, like I had in the canteen with that second marketing agency, I think that's a really helpful one. I think allowing people to recognize where they are. I think I know a number of companies that actually just give maps of the building to their employees, and even the surrounding areas with allocated quiet zones or quieter zones that have been pre-approved as workplaces should you need to escape or get away from the busy main office area. So I think they're really useful. Yeah, I think visual, because when you are overstimulated, and sometimes we will be, I think visual prompts and visual aids can really help to alleviate some of the shutdown and the overwhelm and the knock-on effects of being overwhelmed. Because sometimes we will get overwhelmed and we can't help that. But when we are overwhelmed, there are things that could be put on, like a big clock, for example. So time's more obvious, bigger computer screens, visual prompts with the week's goals and objectives on the wall, so you can clearly see where you are in the week, where you are with your workload, how many of the sort of mini parts of a project you've completed. So again, it goes on from my whiteboard theory. If you create lots of visual prompts in an office as well, so when things do get overstimulating and you are dysregulated and struggling to focus, then there's aids to assist you when that does happen.
Brilliant. That's great advice. Okay, we've got one from Kate here, who says hi to you. She says, as someone who was diagnosed as an adult, how did you finally decide to be tested? Were you told you may have characteristics or discovered this yourself? She has an employee who demonstrates a lot of qualities of ADHD, and would love to know how best you think it would be to discuss this with them, and what she can do for them, or the company can do for them.
Yeah, so the catalyst that caused me to go and consider that I might have ADHD was, funnily enough, after I sold LADbible, I then decided, because I thought I was known as a businessman, I decided it would be a good idea to start a business podcast, and I impulsively spent a huge amount of money on state-of-the-art cameras. I took my bedroom apart and turned it into a soundproof studio. I hired a producer. I booked about 7 guests, designed the logo, bought the domain, and I did all of this in about 3 hours. And then the postman delivered all of my cameras and everything about a week later, and I had no desire or interest in this podcast idea anymore. And the guy who I hired as the producer said, "When did you get your ADHD diagnosis?" Because he recognized this sort of boom and bust behavior in me. And I looked at him and said, "What do you mean ADHD?" Because I didn't have that awareness piece. And I had just dived headfirst into this new business idea, and I ended up having to sell all of my camera equipment at a huge loss because I procrastinated on it, and the returns window period passed. Anyway, that's a long story, but I essentially got my assessment, and the psychiatrist said that my ADHD was clear as hell, and the reasons why the social media brands had captivated my attention over a long period of time is because it was on a landscape that was ever changing. And I think it's so important for the ADHD mind is to, if you are building a business or doing a piece of work, is to maintain the novelty factor in some way. Social media, just by design, is ever changing. It's an ever changing landscape. New platforms change. Each bit of content is a new sort of micro obsession. With the podcast, each guest is a sort of new micro obsession. So the businesses really are built up of bricks, and each brick is an episode. With the podcast, each brick in the social media businesses are a post, and the businesses grew as the bricks kind of piled on top of each other. But that's how I got my diagnosis. After I sold LADbible, I didn't have that awareness piece, and I dived headfirst into a new podcast because I thought was my sort of personality. I was a businessman suddenly, but it wasn't connected with my core values, so I procrastinated and abandoned it. If you want to know how to best, if you see these strengths in an employee, I think you have to be very sensitive and very careful. I think for me personally, if I in my team now of my podcast, which there are seven of us who work on the podcast now, if I suspected somebody was neurodivergent or had ADHD, I personally would just ask them if they wanted to talk about anything. I would signpost them to, well, in my case, they know so much about ADHD because they sit in on all the interviews. But if they don't, then I would signpost them to resources where it could perhaps start the ball rolling in terms of their awareness. And then it's really the directions you want to go. There's a whole topic of conversation, but we know the NHS is extremely strained at the moment. There is access to work, which I think is a great resource, which many companies can aid and part finance the process of going through assessment. Or of course you can go private at a fee to speed it up, but even that's lengthy at the moment. I think it comes back to the awareness piece and almost really not by wanting to hold their hand, but going on the journey with them, and directing them to resources, whether that's podcasts or books or great social media people who are talking about it, of which there are many, and just being really patient and understanding, and again having check-ins with them to be updated on their progress and to make sure that it's something that they still want to do, because they might have said yes to going on that journey 2 weeks ago, but now they might have changed their mind or they're not so sure anymore. So having those check-ins to maintain that you're both on the same page and that you're both willing to go on the journey together.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to go with just one more question from the audience, if that's okay. So we've got one from Angela. She's a college careers advisor, and some students asked whether they should mention their ADHD in their job applications. What would be your reaction to this? Would you mention that you have ADHD in a job application, basically?
It's a great question, and it's one I get asked a lot, and I've thought about it a lot. Unfortunately, I would say no. And I know that goes against a lot of what I talk about on social media. But I think the reality is there is still a lot of prejudice and stigma and misinformation and stereotyping. In fact, I strongly believe that is still the majority of companies out there fall within that category of looking at ADHD as nothing but a liability. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, if those people saw ADHD on a job application, I suspect a lot of them would just be a no. unfortunately, it's not right, but I think that's the case. I think get the job, get in the company, and rely on your intuition to know whether you're in a safe space or not once you're through the door. People with ADHD have amazing intuition. We're incredible at being hypervigilant and spotting whether we're in a safe place or not. And once you're in, then ask for accommodations. If you're safe, disclose the diagnosis, or you don't need a diagnosis, you can just disclose your anxiety or condition, however you want to phrase it. But to answer your question, and it's unfortunately, I would say at this stage, at that early stage, I personally wouldn't, just because there's some amazing work is being done in the space, but there is still a long way to go. And there is a risk that if you disclose it at that early stage, before you've had time to judge the company's attitude towards neurodiversity, you could be putting yourself at risk of being discriminated against from the get-go before you've even had a chance to get your foot in the door. So unfortunately, my advice would be probably not to, at the very earliest stages, get through the door, and then if you feel comfortable enough, then and you feel like you're in a safe space, then disclose, then ask for help.
Brilliant. Sad, really, but hopefully, as more knowledge around it comes out and people will become more comfortable with ADHD, then that won't be the case anymore. But thank you so much, Alex. This conversation has been wonderful, and we could talk for hours and hours, which I know you do anyway. But lots of fantastic feedback from people who have been on the webinar. We've just got a nice comment come through here. No questions, but many thanks for a fantastic presentation. I have to leave, but please pass on my thanks to Alex and Reed for hosting such an insightful and compassionate webinar. And that was from Tim. So that just sums it all up, really. Thank you so much for your time, Alex. Really great guest to have on our webinar today. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. You should see a slide on your screen now. We have lots of events and webinars taking place up and down the country, and obviously the webinars online. Do check out read.com for that. You can scan the QR code that's on your screen and do that now, or ask your Read consultant that you work with, many of whom have invited you on these webinars. I know that for a fact. And thank you all very, very much. We will send this webinar recording now, as I mentioned earlier. Please do feel free to share it with other people so they could watch it. Also, tune into Alex's podcast. I'm sure you'll find that really, really insightful. And thank you so much once again for joining us, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.